Hi, everybody. Welcome back to episode 5 of Coaching Conversations with Richard and Al. So my name is Richard Grossi, and I'm a life and leadership coach in South Africa. And I'm joined here with my fellow coach in the UK, Al. Do you want to say how's it?
Hey, Rich. How's it? How are you?
Okay.
All right?
All good, all good.
I'm Ali Gordon. I'm based up in North London, and I'm a leadership and high performance coach.
Nice. So Al and I were discussing this topic, and I feel it is so relevant. Not only am I seeing this coming through with most of my coachees these days, it seems in my own assessment that it is in itself a second epidemic that has really shook the world of late, and that is the topic of anxiety. So Al and I are going to explore anxiety, what it means, ways to deal with it, where we get it from, for example, and we'll go through various situations that we encounter on what seems to be a weekly basis or a daily basis in our coaching practice. So Al, can you give us a bit of a background into why anxiety is an important topic for you?
Yeah, well, I think it's showing, we were discussing earlier before we came on, that it's showing up in a lot of our clients and some friends as well. So, and it's totally understandable with what's going on, because COVID has impacted so many parts of our lives, hasn't it? For many, it's their career. For a lot of people, it's their earnings, their income. So therefore, the knock-on effect to how they're bringing up their families and their mortgages, but also the anxiety of not being able to get out and do things. And I was talking to someone this morning, actually, that one of their highest values is about exploring and adventure, and they just not been able to do that, and they couldn't understand why they were feeling so heavy and down. So I think it's impacted in so many levels, and obviously the deaths of so many people has impacted on the families. I don't think we can ever really overemphasize how much impact this virus has made on the whole world. It's the global scale of it. So what you're talking about, this anxiety, it's globally. And how does that show up? It's in terms of anxiety attacks, panic attacks, just generally feeling very, very like you're sort of fight or flight, cortisol flying through your body constantly. Like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? What am I going to do? How about yourself and with your clients, Rich?
Yeah, it's as I said, it's become, in my assessment, a second epidemic. And, as a lecturer also, I see this so often, with my students. And as you say, it's had COVID has definitely had a knock-on effect with everything, so it's come from, obviously, we're concerned about our health and about, our livelihoods, and also, but as we come down, it's concern in my students, for example. Am I going to pass? Do I want to be here? What do I want to do? I don't know. I mean, I say, let's break it down. And the general assessment is, I don't know. I am just completely riddled with anxiety. And I'm glad you spoke about, the cortisol and the adrenaline that rushes, because there is a very, very real biological impact that anxiety has on our bodies. Yeah. So when you look at the definition, the Latin word of anxiety, it relates into a choke or a squeeze, and typically when we feel anxiety, people tend to talk about that. They start pointing over here, because anxiety does seem to take us over here to constricting, isn't it? And it's like a all round, like,
as you're talking about it, everything's starting to kind of close up for me, is because it's such a recognizable thing, isn't it? And as you're talking about it, oh my gosh, yes, I that kind of lack of grab air. Yes.
No, absolutely. And another, if you look further on in the definitions, another one is to torment. So it's so interesting when we see, how these words are broken down and where they came from. So in my understanding of anxiety, when we break it down further on, so COVID is definitely a massive, massive one. I just want to look at the very basic forms of anxiety, and in my understanding of how it's actually formed. So anxiety, in my assessment, is a mood. Okay, so as individuals, we have emotional responses on a daily basis to so many things. And I'm thinking particularly of some of my students when it comes to exam situation here, an emotional response to writing the exam, to passing it, et cetera, et cetera. And if an emotion, which should be a short-term thing, we feel an emotional response, it should pass. So emotions are very much like clouds, and moods are very much like a climate. They're persistent. When emotions don't pass, they can turn into moods, and moods stick around. And in my understanding, anxiety is a mood. It sticks around because with emotions, we deem what's possible for us in our world. It changes our perceptions. When we're in a mood, it seems that all those opportunities are not even a thought. There's nothing we can't see. We're just so caught up. And that's why they say, riddled with anxiety, because it's everywhere. We don't see the possibilities. And what's interesting for me is that I often find with moods, there tags a story. There's a story behind it. Because if you think about it, if emotions are sticking around and not processed and turning into moods, that means there must be a repetitive amount of thought going into it. So when people speak of social anxiety, for example, I've got some clients who are very, very hectic with social anxiety. And it's like, I can't go to this event. I can't do this. Why is that? I'm petrified of crowds. But in the time leading up to going to that event or seeing these people that this person doesn't know, the story that is playing around is, oh my gosh, this person may not like me. My possibilities are decreased. I'm going to feel awkward, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so it builds up and builds up, and we get lost in that story. And then there's this real biological impact that starts happening, because obviously, the way that we language things turns into an emotion and mood and goes through our body. And we release these high levels of cortisol and adrenaline, and suddenly we feel this constricting, we shaky, we feel nauseous, and the possibilities around us seem to shrink and shrink and shrink.
Yes. And it reminds me very much, and I hadn't thought about it actually like that. And it's interesting because, one of the things I always talk to my clients about is beliefs, emotions, thoughts, actions, results. So if you always have the same beliefs, you can have the same emotions. The thoughts, the emotions lead to the thoughts, which lead to the actions that lead to the results. So you're right, of course. If you're feeling emotionally restricted, you're going to, everything else is going to, the thoughts will be restricted. So therefore the actions will be restricted. So you end up in this much smaller world. And, one of the things that I've been talking to, and I always, before I go to that, I thought it's really interesting as well, because of course you work with young people. And I think it's very underestimated how much impact this has had on young people. I have a couple of kids. I've got a 12-year-old, and it really impacted on him in terms of his not being able to go to school, not being able to see his friends, and it's really, really had a fundamental effect on the youth and young people that are very anxious about their future as well, about what's going to happen in the world, because we, as slightly older gentlemen, have the toolkit. We've seen some stuff, so we can use those memories to support us and go, okay, look, this is going to be okay. This is going to be all right. But for a lot of the younger people, they really struggle with that because they don't have the toolkit that perhaps we do. What I was going to say was that one of the really beautiful things that you can do, because those emotions are like a pressure cooker, aren't they? There's a building, is just to do a little exercise, which I think I've talked to you before, which is I am sad, or I am anxious, or I'm scared, but that's okay. I am scared, but that's okay. And I think that's just over it will help release some of that anxiety.
Sure. I agree so much. And, I think, if we look at what anxiety is telling us, it is saying, I'm not safe. If I predict that if X happens, Y will happen, and that is not acceptable to me. I need to know right now what will happen because I feel threatened. And there are various ways we can work with it when we look at that, because that's based in language, isn't it? I don't feel safe, but why? Don't just stop there. So when we riddle with anxiety, we've got to look at what is the language around it? What is the language that is causing that emotional reaction? And why is it not being processed? Why is it now turned into a mood? And so when we start to question that validity, we can start to actually work with it instead of being completely like I remember this very, very well. Again, another personal story. This was many years ago. And I was, this was a long time ago. But I was, I remember I was dating somebody, and this person hadn't been, I had suspected this person wasn't faithful. And there was information coming from X, Y, and Z. People love to flip and throw misery at you when you're miserable, eh? Shit.
Yeah.
And people were like, hey, Rich, no, da, da, da. And I'm like, oh, Lord. And I remember I was actually on holiday when this happened. And there was 2 days where I was so just overtaken with anxiety that I couldn't leave my room. I felt everything outside of this little safe room that I was in, felt like it was violating. It was like a threat. I didn't want to hear a single thing. I didn't want anybody to mention anything to me. So I just put myself in a room and didn't leave. And that is the type of relationship we can form with anxiety if we do not, observe it and observe ourselves in it. And so that can become a really unhealthy thing. And really what anxiety is kind of telling us, it's a warning sign. It's kind of saying, hey, listen, pay attention here. What are we going to do with this? Not I'm here to punish you or make you confined into a room. It's like, I need you to pay attention. And where we focus that attention is going to determine, what opens up as a possibility for us. Because like me, in that time, nothing was possible. Everything was a threat. And so my world just closed in around me. Whereas I could have had a relationship with anxiety saying, something is not right here. Let me observe the situation. Let me discover what it is. And let me put it right. So we can get completely trapped in that mood of anxiety and feel like we're imprisoned by it. And it's not necessarily what it's there to do.
And it's such a great way of explaining it as well. So what would you, we talked about what we'd like to do today. One of the things was to give people some mechanisms to cope with that. And I think, you're right. The first thing that you said is that don't just ignore it. Don't let it just flow around like a pressure cooker. Recognize what is going on. The body is trying to tell me something. What are you trying to tell me? What other mechanisms would you use or
sure.
to help?
Yeah, I mean, look, I can tell you what I do to help me with anxiety, because guys, if you're listening, I said this on, I think it was episode 2, and I want to just reiterate it. Just because Elle and I have been coaching for a number of years, it does not mean that we are excluded from the flow of life. We experience all of these things ourselves. So I do experience anxiety from time to time. And so what I'm about to tell you are tools that I use to help me when I get anxious. So what I have done, and Elle, you pointed up some things incredible just now, is that we've had experience and we've dealt with certain things, unlike a lot of these upcoming kids these days who are probably with COVID for the first time, like how's this for a whacker of an anxiety, this situation. Yeah, exactly. What I've learned is I have formed a different relationship with anxiety than I used to in the past, because anxiety is saying, it talks about uncertainty. So it is questioning my relationship with uncertainty. Number one, because, first of all, the world is an uncertain place. We can't be certain of everything. And so my relationship with uncertainty is either to, like I did those days, roll up in a ball of absolute fear, because anxiety is fear. It's fear of the unknown. Roll up in a ball of anxiety and fear and be like, close the whole world off in case anything else happens to me. It's kind of like, for me, I've decided and made a conscious choice. And it doesn't happen like that. When I'm sometimes caught in anxiety for a bit longer, I'm like, whoa, no, come. And it's like my relationship with anxiety is not a response of fear anymore. It's more a response of curiosity with the uncertainty. Okay, I'm not certain what's going to happen, but it might not be what I thought it was. It might be something wonderful. There might be a fantastic outcome. So for example, some of my students that are writing the exams, they might be riddled in their whole like, oh, I'm going to fail. But what if you don't? What if you get fantastic questions? What if things come to mind through the projects that you've done throughout the year? And in my situation, that I gave you that example back then, and I wish I could go back and smack that guy a little bit around and say to him, you know what, that uncertainty that you were so desperate to control was the biggest blessing. So while you were called into a little ball in your room, you were being protected, actually. You were being protected. And the uncertainty that unfolded was actually a blessing. It wasn't this thing that was going to like bring you down. So that's one of the things that I do. I formed a different relationship with anxiety and uncertainty, and that is a curiosity around it. And then another thing that is probably my go-to in the moment, because sometimes when anxiety whacks hard, you know, you don't want to sit down and be like, okay, well, let me think of my relationship with uncertainty, you know? I have found that one of the quickest ways to ground myself is to just, I live on the beach over here. So I often just, if I'm anxious, I'll open the doors, I'll go to the veranda, I'll close my eyes, and I will allow the wind of the sea just to blow on my face. So wherever you are, if you can feel the wind blowing, go out into the wind. And as it's blowing on your face, just feel, this is real. This is real. What's the story in my head has not happened. It is not a certainty. What I've also done at times is I've actually gone to my fridge and got a few blocks of ice and I've put it in my hand and I felt the coldness in my palm and being like, this is real. Even if it's sunny, go out, feel the sun on you. This is real. That grounds those voices and that incessant, story that's playing around and around and around. So it's about getting out of that story as fast as you can and being like, okay, well, that is not certain, but what am I certain about in this moment? So those are two of my go-tos.
Yeah, you can tell you're living in South Africa in the warmth with your eyes on winds and your beach. I think they're great examples. It is about getting into nature, isn't it? It's trying to get into nature and just trying to experience something that is away from all the messaging we're getting. That doesn't help. It's just shut down the messaging, just shut down the Instagram, shut down the Facebook, shut down the 24-hour news. Get away from that because that is feeding the information. I know when I get up in the morning, I have an hour just exercising, meditation, journaling, no radio, nothing. I don't want input. I just want output. So I think you're right. The wind, your wind against your face is our nature. Just getting to the park and just having a walk around and get away from the screens. I think the other way as well is and it's so true for the versions that we want ourselves to turn out, the best versions of ourselves is about what are you putting into your body? What food and drink are you putting into your body? How are you nourishing your body and your soul? It's not a good idea to go, and this is a fairly obvious one, hit the bottle, a nice bottle of wine or the beer, just like this going to have a beer. That ain't going to help because the knock-on effect, of course, it's going to accentuate the whole thing. Once it's you've taken yourself to that place, there's the high and then there's the drop off. You're going to feel worse. I think journaling these things out is incredibly useful as well. What you've just talked about is recognizing, and you're right. What you were saying, as you were saying, I think it's quite a sophisticated way of looking at it. We've got those tools, but I think there's a way of doing that, which is just journaling out, just getting the pen on the paper. How am I feeling? And just letting the pen just go. Don't overthink it, because it's an awful place to be, isn't it? Anyone that's experienced anxiety, it is like some black dog sitting on your chest, and you can't think beyond, oh my God, I just need to get out of this. I need to get out of this. Anything else that you can think of, Rich?
Yeah, something that I want to just tell the listeners. I'd like you to think of anything that you're particularly anxious with. For example, I've spoken about some clients who are socially anxious, whether your anxiety is, I don't know, I've got some clients that are anxious about driving, whatever it might be. And what I want to do is I want to just reinforce or reiterate what I said earlier on about the language that we live in with anxiety and the correlation there. Because, for example, I don't have anxiety regarding social places. I have, like, my big thing, I love public speaking. I'm a public speaker. But there was a time when I was younger that crowds terrified me, absolutely terrified me. The thought of being on stage freaked me out. And now today it is like, it's the biggest high for me. I absolutely love it. And so the story around that fear changed, that anxiety went away, and now I get excited about it. So my mood is completely shift. So what I want you to do is think of whatever triggers your anxiety, and think of a few of your friends or people that you know, their triggers of anxiety, and notice how they are all completely different. And then what I'd like you to do is ask yourself, or do what I'll say, journal if you want to, or ask yourself, what are the stories around that specific trigger of yours? What language are you using? And notice that your friends aren't using that language around their specific anxiety. They're doing it about something else. And so I want you to notice that there is a real tie to the language that we're using. Anxiety doesn't just jump out at us. It is a process. And so we build it up. We form a relationship with it. So whatever relationship you've built up with whatever you're anxious about, recognize that you can have a different relationship with it through your languaging and the emotional responses you tie to that languaging. For me, with the public speaking when I was younger, that terrified me. That emotional response wasn't there because I no longer considered it a threat when I got older. I considered it something else. And so notice that real biological process going on. Suddenly the kind of the strangulation wasn't there, and the feeling moved down to my stomach where excitement lies. So we have the ability as humans to change these perceptions at any time. We are not born anxious. We develop these through our experiences, etc., and we've learned them. So we can unlearn them and learn different ways. And yeah, I think the coping mechanisms we've discussed, I know they certainly helped myself, and those seem to have really helped you, Hale.
Very much so, Rich, and it's been hard fought. I think, I think what I'd love to say to anyone that's watching, everybody suffers from anxiety of some sort and anxiousness about something. It's human. We are human beings, and you always say, we're human becomings. It is part of that's how we're made up. No one is immune to these things. But what I'm hearing, Rich, particularly from you, is get the bloody things out. They're like little vampires. Get it out and try, and if it's not journaling, if it's just recognizing, it's try to understand what's really going on. And I know that sounds quite sophisticated, and I don't know, possibly a bit coachy, I don't know, but that is the way for me that I always try and give my clients, and for myself as well. The other thing actually I forgot to mention is breathing. I think breath is so important in terms of managing these, because we get quite sharp breaths and it gets shallow, and that's sort of driving anxiety. I feel anxious doing that. So just doing the breathing in for 4, hold it for 4, and then letting it go for 4, taking it in for 4, holding for 4, let out for 4. It will just naturally bring the body down as well. And you're right, it kind of the world starts to get slightly more expansive rather than this, oh God, I'm really anxious about this. And of course, I've got to ask you, how did you move from kind of fear of public speaking to now wanting to be on a global stage? What was the kind of what was the steps you took in order for you to kind of be there? Because it's really, joking apart, it's important to understand these things.
Yeah, I can definitely tell you that. And this is how important the languaging is around this and the story that we live in. I started to become far more confident in who I was as a person, because certain people started to, when I was speaking, like friends, and they're like, Richard, that is such an important lesson. Wow, that's amazing. And I was like, really? Yeah, no, absolutely. Please can you tell whatever, And then suddenly I realized, well, hey, I've got something to say, and I don't have a reason to be like, so shy, etc. And maybe I could tell this person. And then I started like being in a management role because I was a strategist for many years. And then I ran a team and then I started lecturing. And then suddenly that confidence came. So the story changed in terms of, I can do this. This is amazing. I formed a different relationship with myself. So if I'm going from a person who literally would stand in a corner at social gatherings to now the guy is kind of like, hey, come on, bring it on. You know what I'm saying? I love it. So yeah, I mean, that's one thing I'd like to say, El, is like definitely look at the relationship you have with anxiety. Look at the story you have formed around that mood and ask yourself, you know, like, why do I need to be here? Because you don't. You really, really don't. We can form another relationship with it and so set ourselves free. But absolutely, like you said, El, we all go through periods of anxiety. Be compassionate with yourself in this process. This is a journey of learning. It is not a journey of reaching a destination. So you're not going to go from high anxiety to tomorrow, absolutely none. But we can observe our journey and our way through that process. And, you know, we can really be kind to ourselves on that journey. And it's a wonderfully exciting thing of opportunity. So that's me from my side, Al.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to recognize what you just said about the kindness. I think that's a really nice, you threw that away slightly at the end, and it's such an important part, isn't it? It's being kind to yourself is the most important thing you can be to yourself, because we're very hard on ourselves, the things we tell ourselves, and the body is always listening. So just try and be kind, say some nice things to yourself. Don't be your worst enemy. So yeah, I suppose that's what I'd like to finish with, is just be kind to yourself. I hope that we've been able to give people a bit of support around that, because it's, you know, everybody will suffer from time to time. There are some coping mechanisms you can use. Yeah, how about yourself, Rich? Anything?
Yeah, no. I think that's perfect, you know, and yeah, so thanks for sharing that, Al. And yeah, thanks everybody for tuning in for episode 5. We've got a good few episodes up on YouTube at the moment, so please go and review them. Some really exciting topics all around coaching and life skills and coping mechanisms, all with the intent of assisting people and empowering people to become self-coaching within themselves. So we look forward to seeing you next week, and thanks again for tuning in. So from me, I'll see you guys next week for episode 6. Al, thanks for joining.
Loved it. Really enjoyed that, Rich. I just recognize if it comes up on the film, like that's my new puppy, Frank. He obviously wanted to have a word, so just want to recognize that. Great episode. Thanks, Rich. Really lovely to see you as usual.
Cool.
And take care, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Cheers.
Yeah. Take care. Cheers. Bye-bye.